Some songs are just hits. They're catchy, they're loud, they're great. But every once in a while, a massive rock anthem comes along it's hiding something. It's got a secret. Today, we're peeling back the layers of Bring Me the Horizon's Avalanche to find out how they turned a clinical diagnosis into this universal cry for understanding. Let's dive in.
Right from the jump, the song opens with this line. Think about that. It's not poetic, it's not some vague metaphor. It is a raw, almost surgical demand. It immediately sets this tone of a desperate search for answers, like an autopsy on a living person who is begging to understand what's going on inside their own head.
But before we get to that hidden core, let's talk about the song as most of us know it. Because on the surface, Avalanche is a polished, powerful, stadium-filling anthem. It was literally designed to be screamed by tens of thousands of people at once. And that didn't just happen overnight. The band made a really deliberate choice to pivot away from their heavy deathcore roots. That shift really kicked into high gear when keyboardist and producer Jordan Fish joined the band. By the time they got to their 2015 album That's the Spirit, the mission was crystal clear: write songs for massive venues. Avalanche was the final single from that record, and boy did it cement that new identity.
It had all the ingredients, right? We're talking these huge, soaring synths that feel a little bit like U2. Big, dramatic string arrangements, and a chorus so infectious it feels like it was engineered in a lab for you to sing along to. The critics ate it up. Rock Sound called it a grandiose ballad ready for stadiums. And it was a hit, climbing into the top 10 on the UK rock charts. It was, for all intents and purposes, a certified rock anthem.
So yeah, we've got this massive, successful rock song. But if you can just ignore that stadium-sized sound for a minute and really listen to the words, a much darker, much more desperate story starts to bubble up to the surface. Let's peel back that layer.
The lyrics are just littered with this surprisingly medical language. You've got words like diagnose, broken, antidote, prescribe. This isn't just some vague teenage angst. This turns the song into what sounds like a direct conversation with a doctor. It's a plea for a label, for any name to put to the pain.
And this line is so important. This is the moment in the song that pushes back against anyone who's ever dismissed these feelings. He's saying, no, this isn't just a mood. It's not a phase I'll grow out of. In medical terms, he's establishing chronicity, that this is a persistent, long-term condition. It's a desperate cry to be taken seriously.
And that brings us to the absolute heart of this song. All of this desperation, this pleading for a diagnosis, it wasn't just some clever artistic choice. It was real. It was rooted in a life-changing experience for the band's frontman, Oliver Sykes.
So this is the big question, isn't it? The central mystery of the song. What was this deep, permeating feeling of being fundamentally broken? Where did it come from?
The answer? A late diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. And that one piece of information, it changes everything. It completely reframes the entire song. Suddenly, it's not a general anthem of angst anymore. It's a very specific, incredibly detailed story about living with undiagnosed neurodivergence.
And get this diagnosis didn't happen when he was a kid. Sykes was about 25 years old when he finally got an answer. Can you imagine a quarter of a century feeling broken, feeling different, without having a single word for why your brain just seems to operate on a different frequency than everyone else's?
For Sykes, getting that diagnosis was a profound relief. He's openly said that it was a huge step in his recovery from addiction because it finally gave him a framework to understand his own past. He realized that a lot of his substance abuse was just an attempt to self-medicate, to try and quiet a brain that, in his words, felt wired for another world.
Okay, so knowing the story behind the lyrics, that's one thing. But what makes Avalanche a work of genius is how the music itself, the production, the sound, was so meticulously engineered to make you feel that internal collapse. Let's break down how they actually built that feeling right into the sound of the track.
The song is basically structured like a panic attack. The verses are quiet, they're contained, almost clinical. You've got these cold synths and all these vocalists really vulnerable. It's the sound of anxiety just building and building. And then the chorus hits, and it is a literal sonic avalanche. An explosion of guitars and drums and layers upon layers of vocals that creates this feeling of complete, total, but also cathartic overwhelm.
And trust me, this was 100% on purpose. The producer and keyboardist, Jordan Fish, he said their goal wasn't just to write heavy guitar riffs. Their goal was to, and I quote, create atmospheres that weighed as much as a breakdown. They wanted to translate a psychological weight into a sonic one.
And they did it with some really clever production tricks. They used these wide, shimmering synths to create a cold, isolating feeling, almost like you're floating with no floor underneath you. In the chorus, Ollie's vocals are layered over and over and compressed, so it simulates this massive, overwhelming choir of thoughts inside your own head. And the whole thing is just drenched in this long, echoing reverb, which makes you feel like you're lost and alone in a huge, empty space. It truly is the architecture of anguish.
So the song tells a deeply personal story, and it uses production to make you feel that story. But the thing that elevates it from a great song to a true anthem is how it uses these incredibly precise, smart metaphors that just resonate with anyone who has ever felt wired differently.
Let's start with the title, Avalanche. It's more than just a bunch of snow falling. A specific type of avalanche, a slab avalanche, happens when stress builds and builds on a weak layer underneath until the whole thing just fails catastrophically. It's a chillingly perfect metaphor for a mental collapse, right? That slow buildup of stress that nobody sees, until one tiny thing triggers a complete, unstoppable breakdown.
Then you have the line, "I'm going out of frequency." That's a communications metaphor. It's like you're sending out a distress signal, but nobody can hear you because you're on the wrong channel. It just so perfectly captures that deep, profound isolation of feeling completely misunderstood by the world around you.
And this next one is brilliant. The line, "because a square doesn't fit the circle," is way deeper than the old square peg in a round hole cliché. It's actually an allusion to squaring the circle, one of the most famous ancient mathematical problems. For centuries, people tried to solve it until it was proven in 1882 to be literally mathematically impossible. So the song isn't just saying it's hard for me to fit in. It's saying it is fundamentally impossible for me to fit in.
And that brings us to the line that ties the whole thing together. My head wasn't wired for this world. This is the language of neuroscience. It perfectly captures the core concept of neurodivergence, the idea that a brain isn't broken or faulty, it is simply wired differently. The problem isn't the wiring itself, it's the incompatibility of that wiring with a world built for a totally different kind of circuit.
And at the end of the day, that's the real power of Avalanche. It takes one person's very specific, very clinical diagnosis and transforms it into this validating, powerful hymn. It gives a voice and a vocabulary to this global community of people who have always felt deep down that their brains just weren't built for this world.
Which kind of leaves us with this final thought. We so often see a diagnosis as a restrictive label, right? Something that defines you or limits you. But what if this song is suggesting something else? What if a diagnosis isn't a label at all, but a language? A tool that finally gives you the words to explain yourself, not just to everyone else, but maybe for the first time, to yourself.